Hi, I'm Jez, and I'll start again. Sorry, got distracted. Right, here we go. Hi, I'm Jez, and in this series of classes, I'd like us to take a look at a Python project that will be all too familiar for people of my age. They're based around these books, Choose Your Own Adventure books. And some of you might be familiar with books by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson. They're sort of fantasy books, but they allow you to dictate where the story goes. So if you wanted to go down the left path, you would turn to page 15. And if you went down the right path, you'd turn to page 98 and continue the story that way. And I thought for people wanting to learn Python, what better project to start with than a Choose Your Own Adventure? So let's begin. I'll just share my screen. I'm going to subject you to some of my my terrible artwork, so bear with me. Okay, so you should be seeing my whiteboard at the minute. Now what we're going to be doing is we are going to be designing an infinite world in this class. And we start with a single location. And this single location is going to give us two choices. We either take one direction or we take another direction. And this will result in us arriving at yet another location like so. Okay. And we repeat the process again, building up a very basic framework for our game where we can start adding in additional functionality as we progress. But at the minute, we are just going to look at how we build this world, generating a different location at every point. Now, what we could do, we could write our code so that it generates the first location, we make our choice, and based on that choice, we then write about the second location or the alternate second location, and so on and so forth. But before long, our code will just grow and grow and grow and just be huge. It'll be like a Frankenstein's monster. We won't be able to manage it very well. So we're going to get the computer or get Python to do the hard work for us. And if you notice, we are repeating just a few steps each time. We are repeating what you're seeing in the box here. We are repeating the process of generating a location, and we're repeating the process of presenting the player with a couple of choices. Do they go down the left path or do they go down the right path? So what if we put this in a loop? We just loop this piece of code over and over again. So we're running the same piece of code here and here, and so on and so forth. That way, we create this infinite map of locations, of infinite possibilities, but in a fraction of the code. And I'm going to show you how to do it now. So hopefully you've all installed Python on your machine. If I just stop sharing, and if I get back to my desktop, bear with me. There we go. Hopefully you're familiar or a little bit familiar with the Python layout as such. It's free to download from python.org. And once you've installed it, you'll be greeted with this screen here, what we call the Python shell. This is the screen where anything we write gets outputted. So if we're printing the word hello world, it will display hello world here. To create a new file, we'll go to Python and new file, and a box like this will pop up. Okay, so this is where we write our code. So if I print hello, okay, and if I run it, the result outputs on the screen here. Okay, so we are going to start developing our Choose Your Own Adventure game. Now, the first thing we need to do is we're going to build a list of possible locations. And Python allows us to do this really easily. We can build a list of items and we can keep adding to it as we go along. But for the time being, we'll probably just load our list up with about 5 different locations to choose from. We can then take that list and store it in a variable. Now, a variable is like a cardboard box. It allows us to store information that we can use later on. So it could store information about lives in a game or points we've earned, or it could be how it could help us manage a timer as it counts up or counts down in a game. Whenever there's a new piece of information to record, I'd recommend creating a variable to store it in, because you never know when you might need it. We name our variables sensibly, because as we progress through these classes, you'll realize we're going to use a lot of variables to manage different things. So it makes sense to name them appropriately. So we can look at the name of the variable, we will see what it's sort of designed to do. It's like sticking a label on the cardboard box to tell us what's inside the box. So in this case, we're going to call it location. So 1 equals to update. So this is like the set block in Scratch, if you're ever familiar with Scratch. So by following the variable name with an equals, it means we're going to update it. To create our list, we need to sandwich our list in square brackets as such, and every location we'll add to the list, every location gets separated by a comma. So this is the difficult bit for me, just thinking on the fly some random locations. So I'm going to say castle for one. I'm going to say should have prepared for this really, town, and let's go with a street. Not the best, is it? Right, let's go for something a bit more imaginative. Woodland. Let's go for woodland, and let's go for I don't know, a beach. Okay. And we're going to design the game in such a way that we can add more locations or change these locations as we go along. Because once we've built the framework, you might start thinking about what theme you want to take. Maybe it'll be a medieval theme or even a space theme. And you'd want your locations to be appropriate to that theme. So we're building it in such a way that it allows us to make changes later on should we wish. So we've got our list of possible locations stored in one variable called location. Okay. Now, let's think back to my whiteboard scribblings, and we were going to create a loop, weren't we? We were going to loop round a section of code each time we move on to a new location. So to create a loop in Python, it is while true. Whoops, excuse me. That's better. While true. So while true is like a forever loop in Scratch. Okay, and we always write while true in lowercase apart from the capital T here. And we always finish a while line off with a colon. So when we hit enter after the colon, you'll notice my cursor indents. And it's this indentation which is the key to everything. So any indented code we know belongs to this while true loop. So imagine the forever loop in Scratch, and we're sticking our code inside that forever block. It's very similar to that. So any indented code, it's like it's inside that forever block that we're familiar with in Scratch. So let's print our opening line. You move to the next location. Okay, so we're just outputting that line, you move to the next location. Okay, and now it comes to the point where we're going to choose that location. Okay, now in order to do that, we need to create a new line 1. At the top of our program, we're going to import something called random. So this is a little module, a little library that we can import that unlocks everything to do with randomization. So imagine a library in the real world. It's a building and it's full of books, okay? And this library is called the random library. And inside that random library are lots and lots of books. And each book is a different function. So we might have a book in there that we can take out, and that is the function that would allow us to pick a random number between 1 and 10, for example. Or another book in this case will allow us to choose randomly from a list. But we can't have access to these books, these functions, until we're allowed access to that library to get access to those books. So we're importing random, okay? So let's make a choice, okay? It's a new piece of information, so let's create a variable to store it in. So whatever random location the computer picks, it'll store it inside our cardboard box variable, okay? And we're going to call it location choice because, well, it does exactly what it says. Like it's the choice that it's what the computer's chosen. So location choice equals, so it's 1 equals to update, remember. And in order to choose from that list, we're going to use something called random.choice. So use the random library module that we've imported, and in that use the book or function called choice. And it will say, okay, I'm going to make a random choice from a list, but what list would you like me to choose from? Well, that's the next thing. Not choice, sorry, location. Okay, so we're going to make a random choice from the location list. So it's going to pick one of these, and then whatever it's chosen, it's going to store in this variable. So now we have that random choice stored in a variable, and we can use it however we want to. So let's print it out on screen. Okay, so let's do this, print. Okay, let's just print location choice out. Okay, so I'm going to run it. Okay, let's see what we get. So if we run, it's going to ask me to save because Python will not run any programming until it's made sure you've saved a copy. So I'm going to click OK to save. Okay, whoa, and away we go. So as you can see, you're beginning to see how quickly this while true loop runs its code. Okay, and I can assure you it's printing out the words you have moved, you move to the next location, and then it's going to print it out. Okay, so if I let's see how we stop it. So let's just like so. Okay, so you can see here you have moved to the next location, beach, you have moved to the next location, woodland. Okay, it doesn't read very well, does it? It doesn't read very well at all. Okay, it's a bit disjointed. So let's add a bit more, let's make it read a bit better. So we're printing out our location. Let's add some words. So we're going to do a bit of string formatting, what we call string formatting. We're going to bolt on a couple of sentences before we print what location we're at. So we might want to say, you find yourself in a space. Okay, so you find yourself in a, and whatever it chooses. Okay, I'm going to use the plus symbol to join. It's like the join block in Scratch. We're going to join those two elements together. Okay, you find yourself in a beach. It doesn't read very well, so luckily we've coded it in such a way that I can change it should I want to. Okay, oh, I've got castle. Oh crikey, I told you this is the most difficult bit. Village. Okay, phew, got my 5 at last. So you find yourself in a castle, you find yourself in a street, or you find yourself in a village. Okay, and when we run it, run module. Okay, oh, there we go. Again, it's streaming by. Okay, so again, you can see there what it's doing. You move to the next location, you find yourself in a street. Okay, we need to slow this down a bit as we're going to play the game at 500 miles an hour. So let's create a pause. Okay, let's create a pause. And the way we do a pause is by giving the player a decision to make. Okay, because people might take a second to make a decision, others might want to think about it, do a bit of working out, and make their decision in a few minutes' time. But we're going to code it in such a way that the program pauses and we'll wait, and it won't move on or run anything else until it receives that input from the user. So it's perfect. But we're going to give them a decision to make. Okay, like I said, it's a very basic framework in this game. But once we have the basic framework, then you can start fleshing it out and expanding and bringing in additional functionality. But if you remember from the whiteboard, we're just going to present the player with two decisions. Do they go left or do they go right? So I'm going to print, again, another print line. There are two paths to take, left or right. Okay. So you move to the next location, you find yourself in a street. There are two paths to take, left or right. Okay. So this is the decision that our player has to make. So the player will enter either L or R, depending on their decision. And again, it's a new bit of information, so we're going to store it in a variable. So let's call this just, I don't know, choice. So this is what the player is choosing. And to do this, we're going to use something called input, because we're getting the player to input something. So input is perfect for what we want. And what follows input in brackets is the message that we want to, the prompt that we want to present on screen. In this case, make your choice, make your decision. Okay, and then L or R. Okay, I always like to properly instruct the user on what input is expected, and try and keep it to a single character or number. Because if we got the player to type out the word right or left, there might be the odd occasion where they misspell it, or they might spell it with a capital L when we're expecting a lowercase. So to avoid any confusion or to avoid any mistakes that might break our code or cause things to error, let's keep the player's inputs to a single character, and we'll do this for the majority of the time throughout the game. But in this case, they have to make a decision, left or right. Okay. And after they've made a decision, before it loops back round and says you move to the next location, I'm just going to print, oh, excuse me, there we go. I'm just going to print a space, because as we'll see, as you can see from the output, it's all bunched together, isn't it? Every time it loops round, it just prints it out underneath. But if we put like a line spacing, it might help break it up a bit to make it easily to read, so we can look back where we've been. Okay, so let's run this again. So run module, save it. Okay, well, I've got an error. There we go. Let's run it again. Got too many brackets. There we go. Hang on a second. So as you can see, we've put in our pause. Okay, so it says you move to the next location, you find yourself in a woodland. There are two paths to take, left or right, make your choice. I chose L, and then it moves on. You move to the next location, you find yourself in a street. There are two paths, left or right, make your decision, so on and so forth. Okay, so we've got something working, which is really good. It allows us to select from a list a random location. Obviously, the more locations you have in this list, the more random it's going to appear. And we'll look at how we can add in weighting to those locations. So maybe there's a higher chance of your player arriving at a castle or a town or a street, and maybe you want woodland and village to be they're less likely to arrive at those to start with, for example. But for the time being, we've got the game loop working. We've got the game loop working that allows us to visit a random location at a time, presents the player with two choices, a left path or a right path, and then once they've made that the decision, it loops around again. So we've created this infinite world just by these simple lines of code, which is brilliant. In the next class, we'll be looking at how we then decide whether they've chosen the correct path or not. One path will be the safe option. The other will be the bad path. Okay, a bad choice. And what would happen down that bad choice? Well, it's for us to decide later on, but we're going to look at how we can fight opponents in up and coming classes. But for the time being, I'd like you to get practicing just building the game loop, getting used to adding more locations and playing around with how you output the text on screen. As you can see, just that one space, that blank line makes all the difference in making the output easier to read. You might want to, I don't know, let's have a look. You might want to put a line of, we could put a line of stars in there or something, followed by another line spacing, perhaps. So play around with the formatting a bit and see how you get on with that. So let's have a look. 1 second. So there we go. So left, we choose right, and we can keep going through like so. At the minute, it allows us to press any letter or even return, but we'll deal with that later on. At the minute, I'd just like you to get used to the game loop, choosing a random location and outputting the descriptions on screen in a format that's easy to read. Okay, and that's the end of this class. So join me in the next class where we'll be looking at how we decide whether the user decided the safe route or the unsafe route. Take care.